Super Mario World. No matter how familiar you are with the game, you probably know at least one tidbit about it. Whether it's the graphics or the unforgettable tunes, this game would continue to entertain many over the following decades. Ever since the early internet forum era, many communities have formed just around Super Mario World, between simple appreciation of the game, all the way to modifying and ripping it apart. Many people have taken it upon themselves to dissect the game as much as possible. One competition that's been going back and forth over the past couple decades is trying to beat the game as fast as possible, between tiny optimizations and major glitches. Today, we're gonna dissect the human limit of Super Mario World. With such a complex history and long list of names, it can be quite hard to decide where to start the speedrunning story of the game. While I would start from the very beginning, I already did that. If you want a complete front-to-back history of Super Mario World's fastest completion, then go watch my video, The Quest for Sub 1 Minute. Why am I here today then? I'm here to fill in the gaps that are forgotten and never talked about. I am going to fully break down the 11x at Cloud category in Super Mario World by first explaining how we got here, secondly talking about and summarizing recent developments, and lastly deeply analyzing the run level by level, which leads us to what the future has in store. Strap in, because there's quite a lot to unwrap. Since I like every project to be its own separate being, I will briefly fill you in on the history of this run if you're out of the loop. The quickest way to get to Bowser in this game is as follows. First, you go up the right side of Yoshi's Island and beat Iggy's Castle. Secondly, make your way up to Big Boo in Donut Plains and enter the Star Warp that is unlocked after finishing the fight. You then want to find the secret exits in Star World until you find a warp that takes you to the Valley of Bowser. This then allows you to enter and play through Bowser's front door, which leads you to the final boss himself, Bowser. For many years, this path would be dubbed Super Mario World's Any % category. Any % is defined as beating the game as fast as possible, without any restrictions, as long as you can do it in the original, unmodified game. Only 11 levels to beat before taking on Bowser. Not quite a hard task on its own. One of the earliest documented and recorded times with this route was by Scott Kessler with an 11:24 on April 28th of 2004. While every level had minor errors, for the time, it was quite impressive. Over the years, many others would challenge Scott. The legendary Andrew G, Lucid Faia, Yatsuba, Menbu, and Yappa-san would all have their time to shine in the game. By late 2011, the run was looking cleaner than ever and was already down to a 10:44. Unknowingly to others, entering the new year, Yappa-san would end up shattering this record by over 14 seconds. How was this achieved? Let me introduce you to the orb glitch. This weird thing in the item box up here, that is an orb. The same exact orb used to complete the level at the end of Sunken Ghost Ship. Having this in your item box allows you to beat any level you want when activated. As long as you can reach the top of the screen and not die during the fanfare, you can beat any level that you want using this power-up. Just like I have shared in the past, please check out this video by Retro Games Mechanics Explained if you want a more in-depth look. Here's my very basic explanation. This glitch completely revolves around a chuck. Chucks in this game, for some odd reason, are programmed as power-ups. If they can somehow be obtained by the player, it will update Mario's power-up state in the same way that a mushroom will change Small Mario's state to Big Mario. Using Yoshi, what you get from consuming a chuck is based on what kind of chuck is in the level. Your current power-up state is also quite important here. Using this information, if If you have a fire power-up and consume a clapping chuck, you will receive an orb power-up. This clapping chuck needs to be just off the side of the screen. What you need to do is called an item swap. An item swap is achieved by collecting an item off Yoshi's tongue, which in this case is a coin. You obtain a coin by fireballing this Rex. You then need to jump and collect said coin while Yoshi is swallowing it with his tongue. If your position and timing is right, you will notice the coin swap into a chuck and then be consumed by Yoshi. This consumption leads to an orb power-up being obtained, since chucks are technically power-ups themselves. So when is this orb used? In Iggy's castle. When entering the level, you can simply climb onto the cage and activate the orb to beat the level. This is faster than getting all the way to the boss fight and watching the entire cutscene. This overall saves between 12 to 15 seconds based on how fast your orb grab was in Yoshi's Island 1. Players would keep taking advantage of this trick in between Dram 55, Menbu 93, and Yapo-san. This time would get lowered to a 1026. By this point, we are now in 2013. The rest of the year would be pretty quiet. But 2014 was quite the opposite. In June, the game had 12 new records. Yes, 12. Keeping track of previous records, it took over 7 years for the first 12 recorded records to be achieved, so how did this happen? Menbu's last orb record set the standards quite high, but those standards were about to change with an entirely new glitch. You thought getting an orb was crazy? Let me delve into its mutated cousin, the cloud glitch. Remember how the orb item swap was based off the type of chuck and power-up Mario had? Well, it was found that if you eat a forward-running lookout chuck while being Small Mario in Yoshi's Island 2, you'll obtain a Lakitu cloud in your item box. You may wonder how this would be useful in the slightest. Somehow it was found that when activated in the Bowser fight, you can skip Bowser's animations if you enter the cloud and throw it to the left side of the screen. With further research and practice, these cloud animation skips could save in upwards of 40 seconds compared to Orb. This opened another whole can of worms, and many would quickly scramble to beat Super Mario World quicker than ever before. During 2014, LinkDead, Dram, Paco, Artega, and GreenDeathFlavor would take their shots at lowering their times using the cloud glitch. This would lead the game to a new major milestone, beating the game in under 10 minutes. Dram was the first to do so in June, and after that, seconds kept being chipped off. How many more seconds could be shaved off of this already short run? For anyone who saw my previous video, you may remember the last cloud record that I mentioned was a 949.46. Well, why is that? Well, by late 2014, a player named JeffW456 had discovered a way to go straight into the credits just from Yoshi's Island 2. He achieved this in just under 5 minutes. And since then, the often dubbed Credits Warp run has become the any % category for Super Mario World. Well, kind of. Once SethBling and other runners started doing this on console, there was a little bit of a dilemma. What was Super Mario World any %? Going back to the early 2000s, many have dubbed the intended fastest game completion route as any %. Credits Warp came out of nowhere and completely destroyed the route that was used since the game's beginning. Do we forget about everyone who used Star World, or do we ban these new Credits Warp runs? Well, a compromise was made, and Super Mario World any % became two categories: 11 exit and 0 exit. Both these names refer to how many levels are completed before the run ends. The term exit is taken from the game itself. Super Mario World has a total of 96 exits between normal and secret ones. The intended any % route goes through 11 levels before Bowser, hence being dubbed 11 exit. Due to Credits Warp simply going through these credits without even leaving the first level, it got the name 0 exit. From this point forward, these two categories would become two very distinct runs. Both categories would get their fair share of players. I have previously gone through Zero X's entire history, but what about the cloud history that many tend to forget? Starting in mid-2013, GreenDeathFlavor would test his skills in the game. By July of 2014, he was able to join the sub-10 club with a 9:56 time. GDF by this point already had plenty of potential to become the next record holder in the game. By that time, LinkedIn got his 9:50.1 record later in the year. 8 players had achieved a time under 10 minutes. It was becoming the hot thing to reach the new minute barrier, but a new group was soon about to form, the sub-950 club. As mentioned before, LinkedIn would soon afterwards get a 949.46 entering October. And days after that, you will notice that GDF also joined the club and crazily got close to record with a 949.62. GDF was now on the grind. While I will be analyzing specific level strategies later on, LinkedIn had a glaring mistake in Donut Secret 1. Towards the end of the level, he lost his shell to this fish, which cost him 2 in-game seconds. While spinning with a cape, Mario's hitbox goes back and forth from left to right every 4 frames. Sadly, LinkedIn's spin didn't line up here and the fish destroyed his shell. Just a month later, entering November, GDF would achieve his desired run. He played every level just as fast as Link did, and actually kept his shell in Donut Secret 1. While he briefly delayed before the keyhole, he still saved an in-game second over LinkedIn's previous run. Keeping his composure to the very end, GDF broke a new second barrier, accomplishing a 948.98. Interestingly enough, just 2 weeks later, Dram55, who was the first person to beat the game in under 10 minutes, would do yet another legendary thing. On November 22nd, 2014, he streamed and then uploaded a run that ultimately tied GDF to the exact frame. Yes, that's correct. The world record was now a 948.98, shared between both Dram and GDF. Dram would have minor mistakes as well as slight improvements against GDF. Ultimately, it would balance out enough to have his run finish on the exact same frame. With both Dram and GDF's tied record having different minor mistakes, it's inevitable that the time would be lowered eventually. Entering 2015 on January 20th, GDF would untie the record again with a 948.107. And just 3 days later, on the 23rd, went even further and got a 947.687, mainly saving time from a more optimized front door and cloud fight. GDF broke a new second barrier in the process. While this was getting pretty exciting, the category started to slow down. The next second barrier would take a greater amount of work than ever previously thought before. There were minor time saves and optimizations to incorporate, but what else laid past that? If you have paid attention to all these cloud runs so far, you may have realized that all of them have been playing on the American version this entire time. Initially, this may not make much sense. For years, runners had been running on the Japanese version due to saving slight time from faster text boxes. Well, at the time, the only reasonable way to do cloud in attempt sessions was on the American version of the game. The cloud glitch is actually ACE, or arbitrary code execution. This means that when going for this glitch, you are actually directly going into and manipulating the game's memory. This sadly means that the cloud glitch on the Japanese version is possible, but it requires the memory to be set up in a different fashion. While not much happened during the rest of 2015, the following year would store quite a lot. Around March, SethBling would start experimenting a bit more with different ways to achieve cloud between the different versions of the game. By March 31st, he published a pastebin describing a frame-perfect trick that would allow the player to get cloud on both the American and Japanese version without crashing, that also did not scroll the screen. While this was pretty janky, it would lead towards the beginning of major explorations for new cloud methods. The entire community started exploring everything they could, and by April 5th, Seth published another paste bin that would further everyone's understanding. He found a new setup that involved holding the X and A buttons while eating the chuck. This setup completely relied on having the correct RAM values, but it wasn't fully understood how these values could be consistently achieved. Well, at least in the same way that it would eventually be. On the same day, IsoFrieze, also known as Dots Are Cool, would publish his own paste bin that published a list of memory manipulation setups that involved powering up a different game, doing something specific in said game, then swapping the cartridge to Super Mario World and holding a specific button combination during the item swap. Yes, there have been periods of time where runners were considering booting up a different game just to get an advantage of Super Mario World. Eventually, there was a minor discussion that involved whether the community should ban manipulating the game's RAM via outside means at all. That discussion wouldn't really go anywhere, and to this day still hasn't had a definitive answer, because something even better was found at the same time. Let me introduce you to the most revolutionary discovery to ever be found involving cloud: the easy scrollless JCloud setup. A setup was found to manipulate the game's memory, just right inside of Yoshi's Island 2. You first want to hit the specific Koopa just at the right frame, that 1, the Koopa flies to the left, and 2, you don't hit the following Koopa. You then get to the item swap just as usual, but when collecting the coin, you want to only hold the buttons L, R, and X. If you perform these steps just right, you just achieve the cloud glitch on the Japanese version without scrolling, a once thought to be impossible feat. The discovery, dubbed B5 due to the memory value it sets, was huge due to how much time it ultimately saved. First, not having to scroll the screen saves just under half a second, and secondly, you save another half a second from just being able to play on the Japanese version again. Each save prompt in the Japanese version is roughly a quarter of a second faster due to less text. This time save is multiplied twice during the run due to having 2 save prompts. This time save was enough to entice many top runners, including Area 51, or Aaron, who had been doing runs since the early 2010s. By this point, he already had a top cloud time and was 3rd place. He started to incorporate scrollless cloud into runs, and just a couple weeks later, would put the new trick to good use. Thanks to this time save, Aaron broke a new milestone and got the first 946 time, beating GreenDeathFlavor by nearly a second. This wouldn't last for quite long though. Since everyone was spending time with this new cloud setup, most top players were at least experimenting. Just over a week later, on May 1st, GDF would get his record back by over half a second with a 946.168. His time save mostly came from minor optimizations in World 1, such as getting a shell jump over the water in Yoshi's Island 4, as well as getting a strategy in Iggy's Castle called Underball that saves an extra in-game second. While he struggled a bunch in doing a secret 1, he was able to achieve an even faster cloud fight. These minor optimizations were enough to get alarmingly close to yet another second barrier. The scrollless Japanese cloud setup unlocked the 946, but what would unlock the 945? Following the crazy cloud developments that consumed April and May, the game would finally relax for a bit, but the rest of the year wasn't quite over. Looking just a little further down the leaderboard, let's talk about Paco 5. Paco had been running Super Mario World since 2013, and by 2015 had already achieved some world records, including a No Star World and 11 exit No Cape. As I have already shown, Paco would also make his way up the 11 exit Cloud leaderboard. Out of nowhere, on October 11th, Paco would make history with the first 945 time with a 945.77. Unlike 946, this didn't require some major breakthrough. Paco's run was very similar to GDF's, besides the fact that unlike GDF, Paco kept his shell to the very end of Donut Secret 1. This was just enough to break the new second barrier. While this new second barrier may seem underwhelming, the 945 progression is quite the opposite. Area 51 was not giving up, and by the end of the year, was back to grinding more attempts. Entering 2017, on January 29th, Aaron would have virtually the same run as Paco, but instead of going for a faster Iggy beginning, he nailed a shell jump in Yoshi's Island 4. The rest of the run was practically the same, and funnily enough, beat the time by just 4 frames and got a 945.700. At this point in time, the run was pretty clean overall. Unlike previous attempts, these 945 times had no obvious mistakes. The rest of 2017 went with no new improvements to the record, but other things were going on in the background. Towards the end of the year, runners such as Lost Core were experimenting with Donut Secret House and seeing if there was a way to perform it faster in 11-exit glitchless. This category was already using a Stair Clip. Abusing the same mechanic in Front Door that allows you to keep flight, it was found that you can barely fly under the second room in the ghost house and save additional time compared to what is done normally. Things would change quite quickly. Just a week before Aaron's 945 became a year old, Aaron himself would finally beat his time. He would go for both a shell jump and a faster Iggy, while he struggled in Donut Secret 1. In Ghost House, he would do the same exact room 2 door fly strategy that Lost Core had previously demonstrated. This saved him roughly 0.2 of a second just in the Ghost House. With more optimizations between Star World and Bowser, Aaron saved just enough time to beat the record by a way greater amount than previously. The record was now a 945.283, inching closer and closer to the next inevitable milestone. For nearly 17 months, the top positions on the leaderboard would stay almost exactly the same. On June 14th, 2019, things would finally spice up when GDF got a second place personal best, with a 945.585. The only big mistakes he had was losing his shell in Donut Secret 1, and having a slightly slower Ghost House. He very much could have gotten the record if it wasn't for that. GDF kept grinding during this period, and just roughly a few weeks later on July 3rd, he would correct his mistakes from his previous run. His time save was enough to not just smash his personal best, but completely destroy the record and achieve a new second barrier with a 944.367. While this improvement may have seemed like a major category killer, what would ensue not too long after would blow things right open again. Traveling back to 2014 quickly, when Cloud was still new. Towards the end of the year, SethBling had been doing many live streams, constantly analyzing the game for new discoveries. He was in the middle of making a tool-assisted speedrun that would demonstrate the human limits in the 11-exit category. While parts of this run are already outdated, one big discovery would come out of this creation: Stair Clip. While this trick was already discovered before this, for over 3 hours, SethBling did a live stream of him trying to consistently replicate this trick in Donut Secret House that allows you to clip through the stairs at the very beginning of the level. Seth was able to get this trick on console a few times, but after this stream, not too much more immediately resulted from this. It wouldn't be until 2017 when runners were experimenting more and more. A strategy for Stair Clip would be put together in the glitchless category that involves using the fire flower in your reserve box. The Stair Clip is quite easy without a cape. You can simply run right and time a spin jump input. Cape on the other hand is a lot harder. Many experimented with the trick over the years, and a few possible ideas were thrown around, including doing a normal fly through the stairs. It wasn't until 2019 that this trick would be fully understood in the way that we know it today. It was found that if you delay or duck for a certain amount of frames and hold a run and jump, you can reproduce this Stair Clip. Lost Core made a useful chart that shows what kind of stair clip you can get based on different delays. The delay timing axis is how many frames you should be moving to the right before delaying or ducking. The delay amount axis is how many frames you should delay or duck before moving right again. The terms low, mid, and high on this chart represent what kind of clip you will get with these frame amounts. Based on your timing, you can clip on different sections of the stairs. While a low clip is optimal, any clip at all will save time if executed properly. This now means the stair clip can now theoretically be consistent, but due to such tight timings, a human will not realistically get the same result. A lot of it comes down to knowing what inputs to go for, and praying that you did it correctly. Around August of 2019, Lost Core would use this compiled knowledge, and started going for stair clip on high level 11 exit attempts. His first run with stair clip would end up being a 948, which was just seconds off record. The grind continued, and not too later, got a high 945. This put him in 4th place at the time, and was inching closer to record. This made him the only top runner at the time to have a stair clip in their run on this leaderboard. Lost Core's grind continued, and just a week later would make history. On September 3rd, he had a run that started with an average world 1, great pace set of donut secret 1, and in Ghost House, nailed another stair clip. He was able to ultimately get a Ghost House 3 in-game seconds ahead of GDF's record. This put him over a second ahead of the run. He kept his composure throughout Star World, and while his Bowser fight was slower by over half a second, the stair clip was enough for him to beat the record by around 600 milliseconds with a 943.75. This run achieved multiple milestones in the category. He achieved not just the first world record with a stair clip, but the first 943. Where do we go from here? What about 942, 941? What lies beyond that? Now that we are fully up to speed with the current record, what's next? Before we continue, I am going to analyze this run level by level. I will be explaining the strategies that top players go for, as well as alternate improvements or variations that could be used in the future. Before we go level by level, let me preface this section by saying this. Unlike Super Mario Bros., where every frame only counts in the last level, in Super Mario World, every frame counts in every level. If you want to get really technical, there will always be frames to save everywhere. And one more tidbit before going into the levels. I will be talking a lot about in-game seconds here. Just like a lot of other games, the in-game timer isn't accurate to real time. Each game second in Super Mario World is 41 frames, or roughly 0.68 seconds. While saving an in-game second doesn't mean you automatically saved all those frames, it's still good to know. Keep that knowledge in your head going forward. Yoshi's Island 2. Ever since the scrollless Japanese B5 cloud setup was found, runners have been consistently performing it again and again. What if there was more to this level though? Remember before when I talked about how it was discovered that you could do things in different games to manipulate the memory? Well, during the making of this video, when inquiring on optimizations in this run, I accidentally brought back the topic of using quote-unquote dirty RAM through different games or other means to achieve the cloud glitch. Shortly after, Lost Core released a video that uses the dirty RAM cloud setup by booting up a custom ROM that IsoFrieze made that sets the right values. He then proceeds to swap back to Super Mario World. Besides not having to do the B5 shell setup in this video, he also achieves a quicker item swap to receive the cloud. Before I continue, what is done here with Yoshi is dubbed as Fast Yoshi. You may have noticed this being performed in the last few records. If you hit the Yoshi block with Mario's head and a shell on consecutive frames, you can cause 2 Yoshis to spawn at once. The more Yoshis that hatch at once, the faster they hatch out of the egg. In this case, Yoshi will hatch twice as fast and saves roughly half a second. Besides Lost Chord doing Fast Yoshi here, he intentionally makes sure to keep the red shell used to hit the Yoshi block. He then grabs, and not long after, spits the shell out. He then proceeds to grab the normally used red shell, but spits it out right after going past the green shell. Afterwards, he quickly grabs the green shell that is now on his left, proceeds forward, and in mid-air, spits the green shell onto the fireball, and immediately does an item swap to achieve the cloud. This setup allows him to instantly perform the item swap instead of briefly waiting, like the strategy generally used in runs. While making this, Dirty Cloud, nor the faster swap, are used in runs. If it were to be used, it could save a third of a second. While it's a bit harder, it is so early in the run, it could be a feasible future time save if someone doesn't mind resetting to it. Yoshi's Island 3. There's not much to talk about in Yoshi's Island 3. The key strategy here is to maximize your running speed on these moving brown platforms. These platforms can push you slightly forward and save enough frames to achieve a 259 time instead of a 258 that would be achieved by simply jumping through. Tool-assisted runs may showcase a crazy performance of doing over a dozen block duplications to achieve Yoshi wings. A human will never get anywhere close to doing this while saving time. Yoshi's Island 4. We have seen a few times previously that runners have performed a shell jump to skip jumping into the water in the middle of Yoshi's Island 4. To achieve this, you need to tap left for a few frames, then tap and hold right while releasing the shell. If you do these inputs at the height of your jump, you will allow yourself to clear enough distance to avoid the water entirely. Optimally, this saves around a third of a second. Iggy. I had previously mentioned in one of GDF's runs that he achieved a strategy in Iggy dubbed Underball. If you have a really clean first jump onto this cage, and consistently time your jumps afterwards, you can squeeze out a 282 in the first room by getting under this fireball. The standard strategy in room 1 gives you a 281. While you can barely get a 282 if you're fast enough without Underball, it's quite tight. On top of this, there is an even crazier strat dubbed P-switch jump. This involves dropping the P-switch in Iggy forwards, in mid-air, while over lava, and getting a frame-perfect jump off it. When performed correctly, you can get a 283 timer on the first door. This can ultimately save around half a second compared to Underball. While that may sound like enough time saved to make it worth going for, again, getting a jump off the P-switch is frame-perfect. This is not a strategy recommended for real runs. Realistically for now, Underball is the way to go. Donut Plains 1. Entering the beginning of Donut Plains 1, on the first Koopa when you grab a cape, you can actually hit the enemy on the first frame you leave the ground after jumping. This ends up saving you an in-game second. Dubbed DP1 Guy, this has actually been done in some older 11 exit records. While it's frame perfect, it's not a bad trick to try to go for on a really bad run. The only other thing to worry about here is making sure you have optimal flight speed. Flight speed values rotate between 47 and 51, and the value will lock once you let go of right. 51 here is what players should strive for, and runners can roughly tell how fast their speed is based on how much the screen jitters. If a runner thinks they have a bad speed, they can tap right and get a new value. Normally, a 51 speed playthrough will give you a 363 for DP1 Guy. Donut Secret 1. Donut Secret 1 is quite complicated. There are two sections that are heavily focused on in this level. First, there is the dry room that is entered to grab a Koopa in order to swim faster. There are different methods to grabbing this Koopa, and you can technically get a 275 pipe entrance instead of a 274. But it is so tight that no human has ever tried going for it in a run. Secondly, more importantly, there is the ending section where you need to avoid having the fish destroy your shell. As mentioned before, when spinning, Mario's cape hitbox goes between left and right every 4 frames. Besides worrying about this, if you want to be fast, you also need to optimize how quickly you can make your way up this vertical section before the keyhole. This involves throwing your shell upwards, and grabbing it while avoiding the fish. Optimally for a while, runners have been going for a 2:58 in-game time. It has been known for a long time though that a 2:59 is possible, with a crazy enough upward section before the key. All the way back in 2014, Lambie achieved a 2:59 individual level run. This really hasn't been seen since, and while this would be cool to see in runs, the payoff isn't high enough for a 2:59 to be worth it yet. Depending on how fast you are when attempting normal 2:58s, this fiercer ending could save between a third and half a second. Donut Secret House. Obviously we talked a lot about this level, and there isn't too much more to say past what Lost Core recently did in his record. As a human, you're not going to get any faster with current knowledge. He got a 374 boo door entrance in this run, which is quite impressive. A lot of the time, he will get a 373 due to different flight speeds and other minor factors. Star World 1. You will see in Lost Core and other previous records that they get a 291 in-game timer finishing Star World 1. This level takes advantage of the fact that only 4 yellow blocks can be spinning on screen at a time. If you try to spin more than 4 blocks while already being in the spinning blocks, said blocks will push or zip you downwards. While 291 is the realistic way to do this level fast, for years it has been known that you can get a 292. To achieve this, for the first zip, you can quickly maneuver to the right and perform the zip there instead of just going down straight away. This ultimately allows you to get to the right side of the screen quicker and squeeze out enough frames for a 292. Later on, Area 51 did a faster variant of the strat that requires doing a right side zip on both. The tightness of this in-game second isn't really worth it in runs. At most you will probably only save 1 or 2 tenths of a second. Star World 2. Star World 2 doesn't have much to talk about. Most of the level you will probably just swim at the top to avoid the fish before coming down. You then quickly tap down to maneuver your way through this tiny gap to the keyhole. A 260 is just fine, but if you squeeze out enough frames, you can barely get a 261. The time difference is so minuscule that it ultimately does not really matter. Star World 3. Star World 3 is another pretty uneventful level. Being the shortest in the game, it is easily beaten in under 10 seconds. Runners make their way up top with the silver switch, throw the switch into the key block, and quickly get flight and item fly with the key in hand. The standard optimal time here is a 192. A 193 time is possible though if you let go and throw the key forward mid-flight. This allows you to save just enough frames for the next in-game second. This time save is comparable to the last 2 levels. Star World 4. Star World 4 has nothing to be improved upon at all. It fully relies off the player locking in a 51 speed as quickly as possible while flying under the level. Front Door. There is quite a lot to decipher in Front Door. Starting off with entering Door 2, you may notice that Lost Core does a spin fly into the door instead of doing a normal fly. This is because if you do a normal fly, you can scrape against the floor before entering the door. If you do a spin fly, this is avoided and can save time. Door 2 itself is pretty self-explanatory and is just a fly-through. Entering Door 7 is slightly different, due to there only being 1 block to use instead of 3. Lost Core instead does a trick where he does a normal fly into the block, but quickly spins his cape to cancel that before entering the door. This prevents him from scraping the floor, while still maintaining P-speed to get door fly entering the next room. Door 7 has slightly more to it. The fireballs that come out of these statues are based on a global timer, but if you have quick enough reaction, you can predict what the later statues will do, based off the statues when entering the room. On the wrong global timer, this one specific statue has been the cause of many failed attempts. Assuming you can get past that, all you need to do is the final dark room. This involves being comfortable with spin flying with a cape, and knowing how to control your height. After some carefully timed jumps, all you have left is the actual fight. The standard Bowser fight in Super Mario World is generally quite easy. Even on a higher skill level, the fight is a little bit under 2 minutes. The Cloud fight on the other hand is a different beast entirely, and takes place in just a bit over 50 seconds. Due to how far ahead LostCore was with Stair Clip, he actually took this fight a bit safer than many previous records. This entire fight relies on how fast you can react to skipping Bowser's phases. The thing is, if you go too fast it won't work, and if you go too slow, you may take a hit and lose a bunch of time. He did end up losing some time between phases. His fight was ultimately around 54.5 seconds. For reference, GDF's 944 was around 53.8 seconds. Due to how much Stair Clip saves and how much nerves were probably in play, it's understandable why LostCore took it safe. This does mean though that the record can be significantly lowered. If LostCore got the same fight as GDF in the fight, he could have gotten ridiculously close to a 942. Due to how tricky this fight is overall, and the amount of pressure runners have at this point, the fight will never be 100% consistent in terms of how fast it is. Between the last 4 records, each fight has varied by at least a third of a second or more. SethBling's outdated Human Theory TAS gets roughly a 53.1 Bowser fight, but realistically for humans, I believe that a mid-53 is probably the realistic limit in a real-time setting, but I'd love to be proven wrong. So after all this analysis, what does this bring the best possible time to? This is probably why you clicked on this video. Well, it's kinda complicated. Unlike other runs like Super Mario Bros., Super Mario World does not have an optimized cloud tool-assisted run. The reason why there isn't a high-level cloud TAS is due to the fact that the website TAS Videos that most tool assisters use bans the use of arbitrary code execution in their submissions. To remind you, the cloud glitch is a form of ACE. The closest thing we have is SethBling's really outdated 2014 Human Theory Cloud TAS. This run achieved a 939.1, and be aware, this is on the American version. If we did this on the Japanese game with B5 setup and maybe the new dirty RAM tech, we may be talking about a high 937. Going further into World 1, if we added in Shell Jump in Yoshi's Island 4, and then P-Switch Jump in Iggy, that is now a mid 936. While the other optimizations are hard to calculate, if you add in a fast Bowser fight like GDF had, that would already put you into roughly the high 935 territory. Is 935 realistically going to happen? Heck no. Is it technically possible though? Sure. An even better time is probably even possible. I'd love to see someone make an updated Human Theory TAS with all the new developments over the past few years. Until then though, all we can do is speculate and look at the top runners and dream. Heck, the next record may not be done by anyone in the top 10, and we may not even know of a new time save that will break the run even more. While it may take a while for something new to happen, it's safe to say that the story of Super Mario World is constantly in motion. Thank you for watching.